years. We have two kiddos, 8 and 5. And, I got to where I am today because of all of those life experiences. Um, yeah. So, like we were talking about earlier, we're both podcasters. So, I do have a podcast as well, Intimacy Evolution, intimacyevolution.com. You guys can go check that out later. But yeah, let's jump in.
Absolutely. And please, guys, please check out our podcast. I've seen a few episodes and it's fantastic. And we actually have a mutual guest that we both shared. So I think that leads us into exactly what we wanted to touch on and
Mhm.
take us right from the beginning, Brianna. How did you get started in this and why?
Yes. Okay. So, like I said, I have 16 years of experience as a sexual health educator. And however, when I had my first kiddo in 2015, I didn't realize how much that was actually going to be needed because we're not taught a lot about when we have babies. What happens after that? Specifically to your relationship, right? We know there's going to be a change and things like that, but um, I experienced some trauma during my birth, and with that, I had a lot of pain. And my midwife's suggestion was to drink a few glasses of wine to relax and use plenty of lubrication. And I know I'm not alone in that diagnosis or recommendation. I know that is given to thousands, if not millions, of women every time they have a baby, and it's just so disheartening. And so, for my husband and I, we really had to lean into our communication and figure out how to get back to not just physical intimacy, but like that emotional connection again. And my husband's background is he's a licensed professional counselor. And so he's had a private practice for 10 years. And so I had to lean into my sexual health knowledge, and he was, going into his psychology, profession, and we collaborated to get to where we are today and supporting couples in nurturing their relationship while they raise their tiny babies or their tiny humans basically.
Looking at the background of yourself as well as your husband
Mhm.
at at that time, was it easier for you to navigate that scenario because you both have the professional and personal experiences, or is it similar to what a lot of people go to and they're like, okay, we're still trying to figure it out regardless of our backgrounds?
Still today, we have things that come up. We are human. We have things that triggers and stressors and all those things that come up. But what I do notice with us and our relationship, because of all of the practice and work that we have put in, and I'll get to like the beginning part. Um, it Today, those conflicts are a lot easier to navigate now. We can move through them because it's not about avoiding conflict in your relationship. It's navigating them, getting through the other side and creating that connection again and doing that quickly. So, when we had our son at the beginning, it was not as easy because we really had to like pull back and dissect every single thing that was happening. And I mean, I can get into some examples and things if you'd like, but we really just had to like hold a magnifying glass up to our relationship and up to our um responses to one another and really see like this is from childhood. I respond this way because of this, and how can we do this differently? And so it took a lot of work. And then again, having another baby, 4 years later, things always change a little bit again. But again, we had that foundation to help us get through those conversations a lot quicker.
I remember the first time that I did that and I held a magnifying glass to myself, or I just looked in the mirror and I just decided, is there something more that I wanted? It was a
Mm,
very humbling experience because for the first time, and maybe you went through this and your husband went through this, I was like, okay, this is my fault. That is my fault.
mm-hmm,
Versus me saying that, well, it's my fault because of the other person did this
mm-hmm.
and I just reacted. So when
Yeah.
I went through that experience, one of the first things I did, um, besides taking some time away to be like, oh my God, I am this person,
Yeah.
was I started to ask the type of women, what is it that they look for? So instead of
Mhm.
having a conversation within my echo chamber, my mind, as
Yeah.
well as my friends who are saying, Train, you're the perfect guy. Every girl will want you. I was like, well, every girl doesn't. Let's be humble. Let's be
Right,
honest,
right.
right? Right? Like, if I'm not what's his name? I'm not Leonardo DiCaprio. As soon as I step outside my house, I'm not beating them off.
Right.
Ladies 25 and under, because that's all he wants. But that's a topic for another day. But what I realized was I needed to hear the other side. And
Mhm.
I think that is what is missing in general, but that was definitely missing for me. So when you're bouncing the situation off of your husband,
Mhm.
or when you're working with these other people, are they missing that secondary piece where it's like they can bounce ideas from the other person? Because a lot of times when it ends or when it goes bad, we turn inward instead of looking outward.
Yes, yes, and I wanna expand on that a little bit too, and say what I realized for myself and for couples that we work with is that we are taught to listen to respond rather than actively listening and being present with someone. And so you're like, "Well, how am I gonna, like" and no, you don't always need to respond, you know? And so once you take that defensiveness, because that's what it is, you're listening to give a rebuttal to what they're saying. And when you remove that defensiveness and you're able to just really sit and listen to the other person, one, that is just such a gift for both of you. Um, and then you realize that communication is a lot smoother in that way as well. It's not transactional. It's it's a collaboration, a conversation. you know?
And I think that's what's missing because we talked about it, right? Like we're taught how to talk,
Uh-huh.
say our first words, say mom, dad, so on and so forth. But as you mentioned, to listen to understand, that is so difficult. There was someone, this is a friend, he was asking me a question, and I said two words, and he was already talking. And I told him, I was like, you didn't even wait for my answer. He's
Yeah.
like, well, I know what you're gonna say. So I was like, so let me excuse myself from the conversation.
Yeah.
He's like, no, 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 I want to hear what you have to say. I was like, you don't, because your behavior shows that you
Shows that.
actually don't. And one thing that really kind of caught my attention is that he would listen to respond, but he would get angry.
Mhm.
So I told him that's a bit dangerous because and he asked me why, and I said, well, look at it from a woman's perspective. In general, women are weaker than men. They're not built the same way. They're not as big, right?
Right.
So I said, if you're going through a disagreement, it's already emotionally filled, right? And it could be scary
Mhm.
for a lot of people. But now someone is asking you questions or you're asking questions and you're just responding and then you're getting upset because of the way you're responding. So how do you
Mhm.
think the women is going to take that? Right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that situation?
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so many ways we can go this. So, my first response, my first initial thought is, hold on, it just went away from me. So when we are in that moment where, again, emotions are high, um, you're creating a story for yourself because again, you're preparing yourself to defend yourself. Um, and so one thing that we like to say is, the story I'm telling myself, what I'm hearing and what I'm telling myself is this. And it allows them to hear because we are two separate humans with different experiences in life, which gives us different perspectives. Like obviously we're going to see situations differently. And so, and communication styles differ from person to person, and yeah, so if somebody is coming off, defensive, that can be scary for somebody. If they're saying, well, why aren't you answering me? Like, sometimes people really need some extra time to reflect. And so there's like a whole like thing that we can talk about there too about listening, being present. This is the story I'm telling myself. Am I hearing that correctly? Or if somebody is like giving a big share and somebody's like, I'm very overwhelmed right now. I need a moment to pause so I can really reflect on what you just shared and then come back. And so again, communicating that and not just leaving, being like, I'm done with this, like getting exaggerative, right? You can't do that. It's like, whoa, I just need a pause. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I want to give what you shared a lot of thought. And so those are some things that kind of help when you find yourself in those like more heated moments for sure.
What are some of the ways that you'd suggest that people would pause to reflect in those emotions? As we both discussed, emotions are very high,
Hmm.
where some people may be defensive, their guard is up. So, how would we pause and reflect in those moments?
Yeah. So having the conversation before there's even conflict, saying like, hey, I notice when we have conflict or arguments, it always, ends in the same way. We don't get anywhere. And what I would like to try is like having some sort of code word or a signal that we can use so that way, because I notice I get very overwhelmed in those moments. And so for me, I would like to take a pause. Here's a code word, or here's a symbol that I can do. And that's a sign for the other person to be like, oh, okay, they're not just leaving. Like, because when you're in that moment and you're trying to defend yourself, you're like, no, you're not leaving. Like, we're gonna finish this. Um, you know that they're coming back and say, like, let's just set 10 minutes, take a breather, go walk outside, do something for yourself, listen to music, whatever you need to do, and then have a time to come back. So plan that ahead of time because you're not going to remember in the moment. You're going to be again very overwhelmed and flustered. Um, and so yeah, come up with a word that works for you guys. Maybe it's not a word that's, it's maybe it's an inside joke that because bringing humor into these moments can also be very impactful to de-escalating the situations. And if you do have one person in the relationship where they're trying to crack jokes and you're like, why are you making a joke right now? Like we're in a serious discussion. That's subconsciously their way of actually trying to bring the relationship back to repair and trying to de-escalate that. Again, just a little perspective shift helps. Um, so yeah, I would just have that conversation before and then figure out what your code word or symbol will be when those moments come up.
I like the code word idea because it reminds me of some of my female friends when they have a bad date, they say pineapple or they'll
Yeah.
text pineapple. They'll be like, okay, the troops have to send them in, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I like that, it gives everyone an opportunity to say, okay, this is becoming a bit much for whomever is
Mm-hmm.
using it.
Yes.
And let's give ourselves some distance. And ladies and gentlemen, when we say distance, we mean distance from each other, but still in the same space,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because this doesn't mean that Tyrone down the street, you're gonna go over to Tyrone's house and be like, "Well, I'm gonna get all the distance I want." We're not talking. It's not. That's
No,
not
no.
code for something else,
Right, right. No, no. Just
right?
go for a walk around the house. Just go sit outside.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we do that and we give each other some space, we discussed that it has to be like physical space as well.
Hmm.
But I'm thinking it's emotional and mental space too. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And that's why like getting outside, being grounded in nature or listening to music, really helps you to just kind of shift your, from emotional to, the logical side of your brain so you can start processing. Um, just any sort of movement that helps you. You could even journal a little bit if you want to. If that's like your go-to, you can journal because again, it's shifting how your brain is processing and it allows you to really come back to like a neutral point.
There was an argument that I had with my girlfriend, and we at the time, sorry, we were discussing how we're going to resolve this, and we gave each other some space because we're communicating over the phone. And one thing we did was we planned something together so we can be away from everything else.
Yeah.
And that gave us the opportunity to discuss when we were ready. So we didn't discuss it the first day. We still were at this area. So we rented an Airbnb for a couple of days and we just planned it.
Mm-hmm.
What I really enjoyed about that is that when we decided to have the conversation, we both were ready to have it and there wasn't any outside distractions
Yeah.
on either side. You know,
Yeah.
like cell phones are a big one, or social media.
Mhm.
Like how many times you probably see where people will argue and you see they're literally on their phone, like, yeah,
And
yeah, I hate
scrolling.
you and I don't like that you did this, and they're scrolling. And when
Yeah.
you look at what they're scrolling, it's like, really? This is what you're you're
Yeah, that's
looking
what
at
you're
as
focusing on.
there's that's what you're focusing on, right? So is that a commonality that you see, that when people are still trying to resolve their issue, there's still those distractions, such as the cell phone, such as the social media, impacting maybe some of the goals that they want to set to lessen the situation from happening again, or even reducing it altogether?
That's a great question. Um, I think the big thing that I see a lot of times is, like, not like you guys did. You set time aside and were very intentional about coming back to this space, and I think because of life today, things are chaotic and it's really hard to find that time together. And again, we specialize in a lot of like working with couples with kids. And so it's like exhausted. We don't ever have time without the kids. And so like they're having these like half conversations that aren't being fully like, dealt with. And so I think that's what I see a lot is it's not, there are distractions